In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast, Leif Thulin is here, and he is going to share why he would take Jeremiah Fears over VJ Edgecombe. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, Leif Thulin, the man that watches more college basketball than anyone I know. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment, and click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode. The NBA draft is literally days away, and we've been putting out a lot of content this week, and we're going to put out at least 2 today. James and I, along with Leif, we went live last night, so we may do some more live shows in the evening just because I actually really enjoy interacting with some of the subscribers on the YouTube channel. But this episode is all about Jeremiah Fears or VJ Edgecombe. Leif is going to actually, let's just get right into it. All right, Leif, you talked about Jeremiah Fears over VJ Edgecombe. Explain why. I know that's against the consensus. There are reports that Edgecombe could go as high as number 3. Fears, his range is, I think a lot of people will see it at somewhere 6, 7, and 8. So you're going against the grain here. But in your opinion, why Jeremiah Fears over VJ Edgecombe?
I think there's a chance he can be an all-star and an all-NBA caliber player, and there's not one for VJ Edgecombe. So that's the simple reason I think he's going to have a far higher ceiling. I think VJ Edgecombe is being mislabeled as comparable with the Anthony Edwards, the Dwyane Wades, the Victor Oladipos of the world, and we'll get deeper into that about how I think he's a role player, and he's a guy that if you're getting the best out of him, he is a tertiary scorer and probably a tertiary best defender. He's a third offensive option, third best defensive option. And the athleticism is real. Like, he can really jump. But the way he utilizes his athleticism is not that of those who dominate games with athleticism. He does it. He has a flashy dunk or a high leaping rebound, and he doesn't put the pressure on the defense using his athleticism. And as for Jeremiah Fears, I think his floor is lower than that of VJ Edgecombe, but his ceiling significantly higher because he's got the ability to impact the game, put the ball in his hands, and be that guy on a team. And I have my trepidations about Jeremiah Fears, but I just think that if I'm going to draft in the top 5 and I want to pick a player that I think has a chance of becoming an all-star, which is the way I personally believe drafts should be conducted, especially in draft this year where many people believe there are multiple all-stars, you might as well try to draft someone that you think can be the face of your franchise as opposed to someone that I think at best is a tertiary option.
All right, dig a little deeper. What do you think is the biggest difference between Fears and Edgecombe?
Fears uses his dynamic speed to get downhill, put pressure on the rim, and he does so as the primary guy. VJ Edgecombe is the beneficiary of attention created and drawn towards the Rob Wrights of the world, who's a good point guard in his own right. He's got the ball. Jeremy Roach has the ball, and they kick it out to Edgecombe. And Edgecombe is an attacker of closeouts, and that's when he gets a runway to the rim, and he uses that splendid athleticism. Fears had the ball at the highest usage rate of any freshman in the country and one of the highest usage rates in the country in the SEC. And in the biggest moments, he scored 31 points against Michigan. He scored 29 and 28 in the 2 games in the SEC tournament. He was single-handedly willing the team to a chance against a UConn team that had won the 2 prior tournaments. And so when I watch a big game player, I think Jeremiah Fears has that it factor. With the ball in his hands, he gets downhill, gets to his spots, and that's without help. Like, that team was devoid of NBA talent. I know Jalen Moore was on that team, but it was not at the same level of talent as Baylor, and he still did more with less, scored more, and was a better creator, and he's a point guard. He's got the ball in his hands. Edgecombe, to me, is a 2 guard who has no potential to play the point guard, so his size is not all that much more impressive than Fears per their position, which is one of the big concerns about Fears. And I just don't see a world where he uses that athleticism to set up other scoring avenues. I don't think he's a great shooter. I think he's an athlete that learned to shoot, and he's someone who is a beneficiary of attention created by others, and he attacks closeouts as opposed to someone who can score on an island. And then if you were to look at the deeper numbers, and I know some of our fans aren't into the numbers as much, but like I watch as much film as anyone. I'll watch it, and then it reflects in the numbers. The numbers say that he's a bad finisher. If you take out dunks, he's a 15th percentile finisher. And so for someone with splendid athleticism, and his name is, and his hat is being hung on attacking the rim, and he doesn't have dribble jump shots. He makes very, very few dribble jump shots, and he's not a good rim finisher. And I think he's a shooter that's competent, but not an like unbelievable shooter. I think there's a lot of deterrents that make me say I wouldn't take that guy in the top 3, the top 5. And unless you're saying, you know what, I just want someone who can play a role on a team. I think he's safer in the sense that he can play a role because he's athletic and he'll be okay defensively. But even that, I think, is a little overrated and overblown because of his measurables and athleticism. But you watch him defend, and I made this point last night on the live. Con Knipple is the better college defender than VJ Edgecombe. I'm not guaranteeing he'll be a better NBA defender, but if people are saying that he's going to be a great defender because he was a great defender in college, that's inaccurate. He wasn't a great defender in college. He has athletic tools to be a good defender, but I don't want to get carried away in that regard either.
So you're preaching to the choir. I have fears over Edgecombe. My reasoning behind it is, and I've said it, I feel like I've repeated it so many times in the last few days. What I love about fears is we're talking about a guy that was not the starter coming into the season. Oklahoma hadn't made the NCAA tournament in how long? 4 years? 5 years?
4 years.
Quite a while.
Maybe more, because that's when Porter Moser came in. So I'd imagine it was even longer than that because they wouldn't have done it after firing Lon Kruger.
So yeah, when I look at Oklahoma, they hadn't made the tournament in a while. This guy was not their starter. He had no buzz coming into the year. And I'm just big on like some intangibles that, that may not show up on the box score. So we're talking about a freshman that reclassified. Not only did he take the keys to the starting job, but he took the keys to the offense, and they literally had to ride him all the way to the NCAA tournament. And they needed like big games for him just to have a shot. The SEC was historically tough. And I just love the fact that this point guard that is considered undersized by some had the mentality as a freshman to carry his team. When they needed big shots, he was not afraid to take the shot. He was not afraid of the moment. He had a game-winning shot against Michigan in the SEC tournament with their season on the line. He had big games against Georgia and Kentucky. And I talked to a scout a few weeks ago, and he said that he watched Jeremiah play. He said, man, they were knocking him down every time. And every time he got back up and he was at the free throw line, talking noise. And he didn't use the word noise, but he was talking noise. And he was like, when you look at him, people think he's small. He's got strong legs. He's got big hands. The body's going to fill out, and he can consistently get in the paint. And so I agree 100% with that. I do think that there are some teams that like fears over Edgecombe, but right now the consensus is saying Edgecombe is the better prospect. And there's talk about him going number 3. So when we return, I'm going to ask you, what are we missing that the consensus is seeing about VJ Edgecombe? The NBA Finals are in full swing. They're actually almost over, but every game has delivered some highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. And whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and even live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you got a read on who's heating up, why not back it up with a same-game parlay? And also, I have a question for you. How could $200 in bonus bets add to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits? And if you are new to FanDuel, this is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, second segment. Let's talk about the consensus. VJ Edgecombe is projected to go higher than Jeremiah Fears, and I don't get it. I honestly don't get it. I actually had a conversation prior to this call, and I don't know if I'm going to turn it into an article on NBABigBoard.com or turn it into a podcast or maybe go live and we're going to share our thoughts. But I spoke with a coach in the SEC and he was raving about Jeremiah Fears. And this was an opposing coach, not a coach for OU. And he just talked about what he liked from Fears and how he was just tough for their team to guard. The same coaching staff also, they recruited VJ Edgecombe. They saw him a lot out of high school. And he mentioned that he felt like Edgecombe he said, he's more of an athlete than a basketball player. He didn't think VJ was as skilled as Jeremiah Fears. And he felt like when he dominated high school, it was because I'm stronger than you. I'm more athletic than you. And he said once he got to college basketball, some of the advantages he had weren't there. Well, he mentioned that the way to defend Edgecombe is to just make him shoot off the dribble. He thought that he was pretty easy to defend and pretty predictable. So with that being said, what are your thoughts on that scouting assessment and what are we missing compared to the consensus?
Well, that's what I've been saying since November. I mean, we did a podcast about like, why is this guy a top 5 lock just for what he did in the summer? Because he's playing these bad teams and he's doing nothing. Like he blends in. You don't want to blend in if you're a 5-star playing against random schools. And his best highlight from the first month and a half of the season was dunking on Mark Few's son, who's a walk-on. And he did nothing that entire game. And then you watched him play in Big 12 play. And I'll give him credit here, and I have before publicly. He turned his athleticism into a way of getting fouled, and that drew point that it allowed him to score points and allowed him to showcase that dynamic athleticism. But I still didn't feel like he was able to show anything other than when he had a runway. So the best way to guard him is make him shoot off the dribble, in which if you pull up the numbers, they're not very good. So he's not a very good off the dribble shooter. And I've said that as well. I feel like he's an athlete who's learned how to shoot, not a shooter. Whereas Jeremiah Fears, the knock on him is he shoots 28% from 3, but he shoots 85 from the line. And he shoots off the dribble difficult shots, and Edgecombe's ones are typically pump fake, one dribble closeout, and they're not as pure. So I'd go as far to say as I think Fears is a better shooter than Edgecombe, and that's his biggest knock. And as for the basketball sense, when I watched him in high school, and I'll admit I didn't watch a ton of him in high school, but I watched him play against Cooper Flagg in high school, and that was a loaded Montverde team. But typically, if you're going to be a top 5, top 3 pick in the NBA draft, and you're in a high school court with other high schoolers, even if they're excellent too, you stand out. I watched the game, and I didn't even notice him. And when he played for Long Island Lutheran, he played against Montverde, and I didn't even notice him. And he was supposed to be the second best player on the court. Not even close. So I think I've always kind of believed his hype was greater than the actual product. And the biggest thing that I have a qualm with is you're acting, not you, but the public who is taking him this highly and saying he's going to be number 3, they're acting as if this guy is Donovan Mitchell. And in the sense of he's smaller than what you want for a 2 guard. So now when he's 6'4" and everything's solved. But the same reason that he was supposed to be concerned for the size was, okay, if you're smaller for your size, and then therefore you need these crazy traits. And so he has the athleticism, but Donovan Mitchell would step back and shoot jump shots, and he still does. He shoots an unbelievable off the dribble percentage, and he's super dynamic going to the rim. He's got different finishes, and he goes off 2 feet or 1 foot, and he does all this different stuff. And VJ Edgecombe, to me, is out of control and just flies with an athleticism. And if he plays better athletes like the NBA has to offer, I think his advantages get mitigated. And then he needs to have backup plans and shoot step back jump shots and all this. And that's assuming that he ever becomes one of the higher options on a team. And I think that's unlikely to happen because the skill set isn't there.
Yep. All right. So these are opinions that I'm going to share. They're not my opinions. I want to reiterate, they're not my opinions. Just different opinions that I've heard from different scouts and coaches about the two. One scout said about Jeremiah Fears, he really likes him, but he feels like you have to go all in on him. Like you have to give him the keys and you just basically have to just be 100% sold in on him. And he felt like, or he mentioned that with VJ, you don't have to go all in on him. He thought that Fears was the better prospect, but he believed that you just got to be 100% committed to him. If you're not, then you're not going to get the best out of him. And that's why
And
he thought VJ was
exactly what I believe. That's precisely my concern about Fears is you have to say he's your star or that pick isn't great. Like you don't want to get a Devin Harris out of him. You want to have him have the keys to the franchise and be a dynamic guard who can be an all-star. And that's no shot at Devin Harris, but that's like the kind of the role player version of Fears that I foresee. And I think VJ can fit in, but I'd rather draft a star. And that's why I have Fears higher. But there are not all that many teams I feel that good about Fears going to and saying that's the team for him.
All right. And then here's another point of view about Jeremiah Fears. The scout said that this was the first year that he's seen Fears struggle shooting. He said he's a much better shooter than the numbers indicate. And I mentioned, the 85% free throw shooting. He said, yeah. He said, I think he's a better shooter. He says right now the numbers say he can't shoot, but he says that, if you look at him prior to college, shooting was one of his strengths. So what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think Fears in those games, he plays well in big time moments. The teams are basically saying, we're going to try our best to keep you out of the paint. They still can't because he's that fast and he's that dynamic and he's got that many moves. And he's able to knock down step back jump shots. And the diet of shots is difficult. So the numbers aren't going to be as good. But I still think his shot looks better. And he shoots them with confidence. I said on a podcast doing Locked on Jazz last week that when I compared these two, Fears is going to be an all-star or he's going to be a player that you're saying, oh, shoot, like we didn't build around him properly. But one of my concerns for him is not shooting. Like my concern is more turnover related. And does he go too deep in the paint and have a plan? Like, does he see the floor excellently? But that's nitpicking. I think he'll be a good shooter in the NBA. And many of the Jazz fans are like, well, we don't want to draft Fears because he's another Isaiah Collier. And I don't think they're very similar at all. Fears is geared to score. Collier is a passer who's more of a bowling ball, uses his body to get to the rim. Fears is more of a blur. And so I actually really like Jeremiah Fears. I don't know if I want to take him for the Utah Jazz necessarily, but I think Fears can return top 3 value in this class. And I don't feel that way about Edgecombe.
I had an opposing coach tell me that if they had to choose between Fears and Yakachonis, they would go with Kasparas Yakachonis, the point guard from Illinois, because he can play on and off the ball. And he agreed that with Fears, you have to be fully committed to him. What are your thoughts on that take?
I agree with that take. And I've actually thought about moving Yakachonis back up my board a little bit because I love the way he plays. And it's just kind of my guilty pleasure type of prospect of a jumbo-sized point guard who can play the silky smooth, guile-related game. But I do agree with the point that Fears, you have to be all in. He has to be your guy. He has to be the option. And Yakachonis, there's a world where he could be a secondary initiator. There's a world he can be the primary. But if you have a better scorer, he can be off the ball and knock down open shots. Fears the ball. He's heliocentric, and so is Yakachonis. But I think Yakachonis in the NBA can play off the ball more easily than Jeremiah Fears, especially due to his size.
All right, up next, I'm going to ask Leif his opinions on VJ Edgecombe based off of some quotes that I received from scouts and opposing coaches. So VJ Edgecombe, he's been compared to a lot of different guys. I've seen Anthony Edwards. I've seen Victor Oladipo. I've seen a lot of different comparisons. I spoke with a scout a few weeks ago, and he said that VJ is Benedict Mathurin. He says the athleticism stands out in college, but in the NBA, when you have to do a little bit more thinking, then he just doesn't know if VJ is a good enough decision maker. But he thought Mathurin was the 6th pick or something like that. He thinks that he can have a career similar to Mathurin, and he's more Mathurin than some of the high-end comps. Spoke with a college coach, and his comparison was, well, he kind of agreed, but he mentioned that he thought the Anthony Edwards, Dwyane Wade, Oladipo, it was someone else. He thought those comparisons were just crazy because Donovan Mitchell was one. He said simply because those guys played with the ball in their hands in college. They got ISOs. They were isolation scorers. He said VJ was not an isolation scorer. He said Jaden Nunn handled the ball. Rob Wright handled the ball. And he thinks it's just a big jump for you to talk about a guy that was probably their third ball handler at Baylor to all of a sudden being a guy that's going to have a lot of on-ball reps and being an isolation scorer in the NBA. And so he thought VJ is not a good shooter off the dribble and not as creative. So he just thought like he's been unfairly compared to some all-stars, and he doesn't think VJ is an all-star. So what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with every word you just said, like every word of that. And the only thing I would like at all have pick a bone with, if I'm really being nitpicky, would be that Benedict Mathurin is bigger and a better shooter. And Benedict Mathurin has drawbacks. I think Edgecombe is a more willing defender than Mathurin. I think Mathurin has all the traits to be a good one. I think even in college, there's times he was like, I'm the best athlete in here. That's fine. I'm indifferent. I think Edgecombe's got the effort. I just don't think he's as long and coordinated, honestly. I think he's a great athlete. But you ever watch a football player then play another sport, or sometimes it's a great athlete play another sport, and you're like, wow, that guy can jump out of the gym. I have a great example, actually. There's a NFL tight end. I'm not going to say who. There's an NFL tight end I played pickup basketball with while I was in college, and he could put his head through the rim practically. And whenever he tried to dunk, he'd miss. And at times, and I mean, he could put like his hands would be scraping the top of the backboard. But whenever he tried to dunk the ball, he'd miss it. So VJ Edgecombe obviously is far more refined. But to me, when he plays basketball, you see the athleticism, and it's like, oh, if the athleticism doesn't work, there's no plan B. So the part about Mathurin struggling in the NBA because you got to do more thinking, the athleticism doesn't coast as far. That is my exact concern with VJ Edgecombe. As for the part about him not being primary in ball, that is what I've been saying for months and months and months about VJ Edgecombe, is that Anthony Edwards had the ball the entire time, and he played lane line to lane line vertically. So basically he played in a 7-foot spot. Anthony Edwards would have it and he'd be at the top of the key. Oladipo was a natural slasher, and he played a little bit off the ball. But if I watched Indiana in 2013, he had the ball in his hands and worked off pick and rolls from Tyler Zeller. So if you really want to dive into the history of the college basketball, that's the case. So the fact that Rob Wright was the better initiator of the offense and was the better driver to the rim throughout much of the season, the better finisher, better pick and roll initiator, Rob Wright was better than VJ Edgecombe at it. Edgecombe had all the traits and the allure, but the way they designed their offense for years past, Keontae George was high volume, allowed to do whatever he wanted. So was Jacoby Walter. And VJ could have and had those chances, but they still didn't give him the ball in that same way. And to me, that indicated a lack of trust for that ability. And it didn't lead to winning. So they were best off when Roach and Wright had the ball in their hands, and Edgecombe was an attacker off of closeouts. So expecting that type of player to all of a sudden be an isolation creator and warrant top 3 pick is bold to me. I hope it happens, because then the Jazz get a guy that I think is better in Trey Johnson or Ace Bailey. But I'm a little bit biased. I just have felt this way all season. So this is music to my ears, but I'm glad other people are seeing it, because I've felt crazy for a while thinking, okay, like what are people seeing that makes them think like, yeah, I know he can jump high, but like he's been able to jump high and he's still blended in against random teams.
If you are Philadelphia 76ers and you had to choose between just these two, who are you going with?
For the Sixers, probably Edgecombe, because they're winning now and he can play a better role. I can see them taking him. I would take Ace Bailey if I'm the 76ers, even though I have Trey Johnson higher than Ace Bailey, though. So I think the 76ers are a very odd team. So I'd take Edgecombe to answer your question, but I don't think either are a great pick.
All right. You're the Charlotte Hornets, and we'll talk about them next in the next episode. If you're the Charlotte Hornets and you had to choose between these two, just these two, who are you going with?
I'll go with Edgecombe because they have LaMelo Ball. If LaMelo Ball, they say, you know what, we're going to try to get a haul for him and we're going to take someone to be our star, then it's clearly Jeremiah Fears to me. And I'd actually love that, to turn the keys over to him, and it would make sense. But as currently constructed, Jeremiah Fears doesn't make sense because LaMelo Ball is the ball-in-hand guy, and Fears I don't think is a very good off-ball player. So I guess I'd go with Edgecombe in that instance as well. I would prefer a guy like Con Knipple, honestly. Even though I have Edgecombe slightly ahead on my board, I'm not so sure I'm right about that.
All right. Utah Jazz. If you had to choose between these two players, who are you going with?
Fears.
Okay, so it's 2-1 Edgecombe.
I don't love it. I don't love it for my Jazz. I'd rather go with a different player, but I'd rather have a chance of picking a star than someone I don't see being a star. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't mind VJ Edgecombe. I just don't think he warrants the top 3 buzz.
The Washington Wizards at 6. If you had to choose, who you going with?
I'm going with Fears because I love Bub Carrington, but there's not enough track record that says Bub Carrington is so good you can't pick a player that you think could be better. And I don't think Edgecombe has that like it factor to be the number 1 option. What they need is the number 1 option to complement the defensive players that they have. So I would go with Fears.
All right, 2-2. All right, New Orleans Pelicans. Fears or Edgecombe?
That's a tricky one because as is, this team could compete kind of. I expect them to make some trades, and that would change my answer. Part of me would say I'd love to see the tutelage that CJ McCollum would give Fears to be the main guy, but I would go with Edgecombe if you're going to try to win in the immediate times and play him next to a CJ McCollum and next to a Trey Murphy, and I think he blends in between them well. It depends if you're looking for the short term or the long term in that one.
Okay. If you are picking at number 8, if you're the Brooklyn Nets.
Fears all the way. Because they would turn the keys over to him. And if it's a team that has an avenue for him to be the guy, it is Fears all the way.
All right. So I think it was at 3-3?
3-3.
All right. Toronto Raptors. If you're Toronto, and we'll end it on this one. If you're Toronto, you had to choose between these two. Who would you take?
Wow, that's a tricky one. I'd go Fears because you have the possibility of more. The issue is then Scotty Barnes and Ingram and Barrett. There's just a redundancy that you have drivers that don't shoot particularly well. But I think you'd still run into that same issue with Edgecombe. You might as well take a swing here, in my opinion, because they need to figure out what they're doing and what the hierarchy will be.
Yeah, that team is a team that I just can't really figure out the direction that they're going in. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, share your thoughts. Let us know why you believe that Fears is better than Edgecombe or Edgecombe is better than Fears. And once again, thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Be sure to tune in for our next episode where Leif and we're going to talk about the Charlotte Hornets options at number 4. We're out.